Hey guys, welcome to a special edition of the Inside Scoop. My name is Neil Crawford. I'm your host and also the founder of Anytime Soccer Training. This is another installment of a mini series we're doing on debunking, understanding, getting a better appreciation for the cost and the drivers of accessibility or lack thereof of youth soccer in the States. It's something that's often talked about, vented about, but I felt as someone from the outside looking in that there was still an opportunity to talk about the details, build a better appreciation for what clubs are going through in the U.S., an appreciation from the parents and the players' perspective, and produce this content so that we can get you guys' feedback and hopefully we can help people who are in a position to make changes for the good in our country. So to help facilitate this conversation, I reached out to my dear friend, Coach Rory. Many of you know him from the YouTube channel. He focuses on helping grassroots, not so grassroots, coaches design technical and tactical training sessions that gets past all the fluff and helps you with practical tips that you can apply today. And I love his show and I love his channel. And I'll link the channel here in the show notes. But in addition to that, you're also a coach, you're a dad, so you understand the parents' perspective of kids who play high-level soccer, and you're in the Philadelphia area. So, Coach, welcome to the show. Introduce yourself, and we're going to get started.
Hey, Neil. Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on for another time. I always love jumping on. And I did reach out a little bit because of the episode. I was catching up on the Inside Scoop recently. And yeah, I mean, the pay to play and just the high level of costs in this country is a real passion of mine. I think, most people know me from my YouTube channel, and I did a really good job kind of summarizing what that channel is. It's mostly a youth soccer channel aimed at coaches, grassroots or otherwise. And once in a while, I'll throw some videos on there. And I do have a few videos on there about American culture, about pay to play, about costs. And one of the things, that I really wanted to come on and discuss with you is kind of my take on what you were talking about. And for me, a lot of the discussions that you are having is kind of what I hear a lot when either I listen to podcasts or YouTube videos or people start talking about the costs associated with the game in the United States. And once in a while, you'll get, a celebrity or somebody high up in the soccer sphere who will rant and that'll go viral. And then people will start talking about, a lot of what I term as micro issues. And I want to make sure that when I say micro issues, I don't mean that it's not an important issue. So a lot of the stuff you were talking about in the prior episode on pay to play, things like, the costs that clubs endure, costs to find fields, tournament costs, travel costs, those are all micro issues that are, they're really a result of the macro problem, which is the ecosystem, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, no, I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, so let me tee up the series and then where you're going to fit into the conversation. So I have one club director who founded a club and then effectively, for all practical purposes, merged his club with a larger club so that he could survive and offer more programming to his kids. And now he's an ECNL coach, an ECNL program. So he talked to us about the micro issues of what it actually costs. I have another club director who's going to talk to us about the political landscape and what it means to be a visionary and trying to do things differently and the headwinds that you face there. We have nonprofits that will come in and say, okay, this is what we're doing on the ground for our communities to try to lower the cost curve, at least in our communities. And then I want to get parents' perspectives as well. So I have some parents I'm reaching out to say, hey, what is it that you really want in the soccer club? And what does that look like? But where you're going to add tremendous value in this conversation is those macro issues that impact the entire ecosystem, that all of the participants and stakeholders that I just mentioned, a lot of their behavior, frustration, good things, bad things are impacted by that. So what we're going to do is go take the 5,000 foot view and say, okay, you led off one of your shows talking about the revenue of the clubs and how that compares to other countries. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, and I think just to start the entire discussion, specifically the system in the United States is really set up to increase cost to families, not decrease cost to families. And my experience in Argentina and in Scotland is that most of the clubs, the ecosystem in those countries is set up to decrease costs. And there are always going to be exceptions to the rule. And I think it's great that you're having some other voices come on, especially some voices who are doing some good things, because a lot of times, we talk about this and it's a lot of negativity and a lot of finger pointing and a lot of, maybe criticism when we have tons of good people in this country doing great things. So just from a macro view of things, if you were to look at just how a club generates revenue. So if you look at in the United States, how does a club generate revenue? Well, there's really only two ways that 99% of the clubs can do that. And I'm not talking about any of the MLS clubs. There's a couple of USL clubs who can generate revenue in other ways. But most of the clubs that the vast majority of people's sons or daughters are playing at can only raise money based on, number one, the tuition, so parent payments, or two, sponsorships. Now, most of the clubs that I have worked with, they don't bring in a significant percentage of their revenue from sponsorships. Now, maybe some do, maybe there are some outliers, but the vast majority of the money that they need to run their company, to run their club, is tuition. And so the only way you either get more money is you either raise tuition or you get more players. Those are really, from just 1,000-foot view, the only ways that clubs in this country can make money to run their club. And you're going to have directors, it sounds like, on talking about the cost of doing that. So I'm not going to get into that. But that's, again, a micro issue of the fact that the only way that the club can actually bring money in are from tuition payments or sponsorships. Now, if you compare and contrast that to a club in Argentina or a club in England or, most clubs internationally, there are several other revenue streams. So the first that is unique, or not unique, that's different than the United States, is something called training compensation and solidarity payments. So without getting too into the weeds on that, and I actually have a video talking about this exact topic on my YouTube channel if you're really interested. I do get into the weeds on it. Basically, if you have a player that you have trained at your club from age 12 to age 21, you are eligible for compensation anytime that player is bought and sold throughout their professional career. And so, not only that, you have the ability to sell a player. So that goes above and beyond training compensation and solidarity payments. So if you have a player who a larger club is interested in and they go train with them for 2 weeks and they say, okay, we want to make you an offer for that player, that's a stream of revenue. The second form of revenue, which is unique to most clubs in the United States that they don't have access to, is first team revenue. So most international clubs at some level, and we always talk about at the highest levels, so Arsenal and Liverpool and the Premier League and all that stuff, but every club in England for the most part has a first team, and they could be practicing, or they could be participating in the fifth division, in an amateur division, in whatever it is. There is a way and forms of revenue through that first team. So matches, attendance at matches, concessions at matches, kits, streams of revenue that most clubs, youth clubs in the United States don't have. The third form that, again, is unique to most international clubs is what they call club memberships. So the culture of whatever town, whatever city that you're in, whatever football club they represent and they support, they will pay a small fee. And this is like everybody in the city or a lot of people in the city. And it might be $20, it might be $50 per year. And they do it every single year, regardless if they have a child in the club or not. And that particular membership might afford them some, advantage of buying tickets or, discount at the club store. There's several different ways that they market that, but that doesn't really happen in the United States. In the United States, once your son or daughter is done at your club, you're done putting any money into the club. And so, the club just tries to get a new batch of recruits, so to speak. The fourth one is similar. So that would be sponsorships. Now, if you have a first team, in any level, your ability to gain sponsors is much higher. So in my experience, clubs internationally have a much easier or they're able to get more percentage of their revenue from sponsorships than the United States clubs. Okay. And the last one, because it's not, I don't want to paint it whereas international clubs, they don't charge anything. That's not the case. There is tuition at many international clubs. But I will say, again, in my experience, the tuition is dramatically less. I believe, in the Netherlands, it's like $150 per year. Compare that to $6,000 for an ECL club or whatever it is in the United States. So there can be some form of tuition and parent payments, but it's dramatically less. And so, when you look at all of those forms of revenue, the ecosystem outside of the country is set up to lower the cost of tuition. And the vast majority, there obviously are MLS clubs, there's some USL clubs, that are professional clubs that have academies that are either free or very, very cheap in the United States, but it's few and far between. And, you and I spend a lot of time, worrying about grassroots and worrying about the 99% in this country, because that's really where the vast majority of the players play. So just from a revenue standpoint, I know we're going to get into some other big picture topics. Those are the big talking points in terms of why a US club is dramatically different in the way it's set up from an ecosystem standpoint than an international club.
Yeah, thanks for that. And let me add one big qualifier. Some people will say, oh, you're just talking about the issues with no solutions, and we'll give our thoughts at the end. But part of the solution is actually a clear diagnosis. And that's part of what we're trying to do here. Because I wasn't sure, I had never thought about club membership. You see me taking my notes, I'm in school. And I knew there was training compensation, but I didn't completely appreciate the impact of that or the selling of the players. And so we're also going to put those videos in the show notes as well for people who want to learn more. And then they can comment as directly. You get back to folks and you can help them out even more. So anecdotally, we know famous stories like Neymar, Jude Bellingham are big examples of even, there's other guys. It's a few other ones, even esteemed, the name will come to the Fletcher Moss Academy. Fletcher Moss Academy is a grassroots club that is known, it's in the center of Manchester, has a great working relationship with Manchester United and are known to send players to Manchester United. So I say all that to say, anecdotally, if you get a big name like a Jude Bellingham, what impact does that have on the grassroots club that actually spent a lot of time developing him? Neymar was the same way.
Yeah, and what you're describing is what I think a lot of people don't understand, and it's the economy of football, and it's kind of an unknown thing in the States. But the way that most grassroots clubs can stay relevant is what I talked about. But when you're looking at players, so Jude Bellingham, for example, every time he's sold, a percentage of that price, that cost, that signing goes to the grassroots clubs, and it's a calculation that FIFA regulates. For whatever reason, FIFA has decided on many levels, not just training compensation and solidarity payments, to exclude the United States from their rules. There's politics behind a lot of that, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in that. But just objectively, there are FIFA rules that the United States does not apply by or play by. And so if Jude Bellingham is sold, he was sold to Dortmund. I don't remember the amount. Let's just say $30 million. It was a very high number. A percentage of that number goes to Derby County, who trained him. I don't know the exact ages. Let's just pretend it's from 12 to 14, whatever it was. So there's a specific set mathematical calculation in terms of how much money Derby County gets for Jude Bellingham. But then Jude Bellingham was sold for $70 million to Real Madrid. Again, this is the training compensation and solidarity payments is until Jude Bellingham retires. So if he transfers when he's 38 years old, Derby County, because they trained him from 12 to 14, gets something out of that. So you get this continuous cycle, and we're using big examples. We're using star power examples, which I think is important to use so people can understand it. But this is happening all over with much, much smaller names, and much, much smaller numbers and fees. But these revenues are what keeps a lot of clubs internationally, keeps their revenue down for families.
So we're going to go now next to the applying demand and the cost. But you have to imagine, even if it's unconscious, even if it's not an ethical issue, you have to imagine that impacts how these grassroots clubs prioritize development in some way. And then how the EPL clubs and the other clubs in all of the various divisions, the relationships they have with these grassroots clubs in terms of coaching education, in terms of relationships, like literally like relationships, getting to know them, showing an interest in the program. I think about recreational soccer here, which is going to be the first level of soccer almost anyone plays. I don't care if you're Messi or you're just having a kick about. All kids go through recreational soccer. And without being, trying to accuse anyone or anybody, there's typically not going to be an MLS youth director coming to those recreational facilities or or having workshops with those recreational coaches saying, this is sort of how we like to play. This is what we're looking for. It's kind of viewed as a separate program. And then if kids are serious about soccer, they'll extract them out of that program instead of part of the development process and a key part of the development process. So what are your thoughts on that? And then we'll go to sort of the cost, the supply and demand issue.
Yeah, and definitely that ties into the cultural expectations as well, what you're describing. You know, when your priorities are, I mean, you look at any business, and we could talk about this from a business standpoint as well. Any business is going to react to its revenue streams. I mean, that's where you're going to focus your energy, where you're going to focus your motivations, your goals. And so if your main revenue stream is payments from parents, which is essentially player tuition, that's where your focus is going to be. So, a lot of what, we would talk about in terms of player development can be stifled because of the incentives are to focus on, are the parents happy? And a lot of development, especially in parents who are not educated, may not make them happy. So, the other part of this is just the connection between when you were talking between the connections of a higher team to a rec team or a lower team. I couldn't help but think about some of my experiences in Spain. And, when you look at, and part of this is cultural, a lot of the clubs in the Barcelona area, they play very much like Barcelona, and they're not Barcelona, but they do that because they have relationships with Barcelona coaches who come out and coach them. And we don't have those relationships here because, again, the financial incentives are not aligned. So, the smaller clubs, if my team has a player that ends up going to the Philadelphia Union's academy, that's fantastic for that player. And I feel great. And I'm glad I helped them, but that doesn't do anything for the club I'm at, other than maybe some sort of advertisement and recognition to say, hey, look at this so-and-so person's now playing on the Philadelphia Union, but that only helps so much. Whereas if, there was some fee that the Philadelphia Union were to pay the club that I'm at to take that player, that would help us out a lot more and potentially would realign, what you're speaking about in terms of the values.
Yeah, so let's pivot to a sort of supply and demand analogy as we move past revenue. So the demand in this case is driven by parents and players who want to participate in soccer. And at its core, the argument is there is a higher demand, right? There are kids and parents who would want access to competitive soccer who are excluded from competitive soccer because of the cost. And then there are cultural and logistical things going on as well. And when I say logistical, like if it's practices at 4:30 and, you have working class parents and that kind of stuff. But let's talk strictly financial. The assumption has to be there's a parent out there that would attend Coach Rory's practices, that would join Philadelphia Union had it not been for the cost of entry. So then we go to the supply, though. And this is where it gets a little complicated for American culture. The supply is it's a full chain of features. One is perceived value in the coach in the training session. Another is the competitive gaming program. And then another one is the leagues that competitive gaming program participates in. So if all three of those are not aligned, and oh, by the way, and the team has to win, it appears to be that supply dries up. And that's where the leagues and the exclusion of the leagues may play a part in reducing the supply of competitive soccer, if that makes sense. So what do you think about that? And I don't know if that made sense, but I'm trying my best to frame it properly.
I know it. I think what I'll do is take it from like a parent perspective. So if you are a parent and you have a player who is a higher level player, or you aspire to be a higher level player, let's just say, you are looking to play in probably one of two leagues in the country. Okay, MLS Next or CNL. There are some very good, NAL and EDP leagues across the country, and some small pockets here or there. But just from a broad stroke point of view, if you're not playing MLS Next or ECNL, especially on the boys' side, I would say, just because that's the majority of my experience. The girls' side, obviously, of the girls' academy, you're probably not getting the exposure that you need to get to whatever level it might be, right? College, pro, whatever. So from a supply and demand standpoint, it depends where you are in the country a little bit. But like, let's just take MLS Next. And I live in the state of Pennsylvania. There's only 4 clubs that have MLS Next status, okay, in Pennsylvania. And God forbid you're in Pittsburgh, there's only 1. So if you are in Philadelphia, there's 2. And if you're in the middle of the state, you have my club. So there's 1. But even then, those are your options. Those are your 4 options to play MLS Next in Pennsylvania. And, it's getting into gatekeepers. So if you're at a fantastic club that's not ECNL or not MLS Next, you're only going to be there for so long if you want your player to get the specific exposure that you want. So now, getting back to the financial piece, you're sort of forced into making limited options. So your only option is the monopoly, or 1 or 2 options, and you really can't, necessarily compare and contrast the prices. Even if you end up knowing the prices, your options are extremely limited. So you get into monopoly type situations, and financially, there's no way around that. From a business standpoint, your options are incredibly limited. And if you have a team that is a grassroots team that, let's say, had a fantastic coach that you built to a certain level, they're not going to let you into ECNL. Like, they're not going to let you into MLS Next just because you're winning whatever it might be, even if it's national championships. So that I think that's what you're describing in terms of the sort of, supply and demand type of issue.
Yeah, you've done a much better job of articulating, so I appreciate that. And let's take it a step further. If you've created a product that's excellent, in this case, we're talking about developing players, and however that is defined, because I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. And you're playing in the way, in the playing style that your club and team has said, hey, this is how we want to play. Using the same analogy, you have no distribution. You can't get into the App Store. You can't get into Walmart. So no one else sees the good work you're doing. And then on top of that, your best players, which we talked about before, are scooped up by the bigger clubs, and you don't get compensated for it. This is not a venting session. This is just to say that's a tough one. Like, you have to then be a bit territorial, right? You'll see coaches who don't want kids to guest play, and people will give them a hard time saying, oh, it's my kid. If you don't want a kid to guest play, you're not about development, right? And I have a guest playing group, and I'm for that, but I can understand the impulse, right? We've invested 8 years in this player. We can't offer MLS. We can't offer ECNL, and we may even believe what we can't offer is better for that player's long-term development. But there's a bottleneck there, and what do we do about it? And then that drives the cost up. But there's another element, and now we're going to go into the cultural expectations. Oh, actually, let me say this, and then we'll get into cultural expectations. In the UK, it kind of goes both with culture as well. In the UK, exact same scenario. My child is playing in their local grassroots club. And if they're really into it, they may sign up with another relatively inexpensive grassroots club. That's going to get them 2 practices a week and 2 games. Okay. But I'm going to know that the grassroots clubs have relationships with the various professional clubs. So in some respects, there's a club neutral pathway to becoming a professional. I don't necessarily have to spend too much time being almost like an agent for my child to get them into the proper team without, there's the common sense stuff of you're going to play for the best grassroots club that has the best relationship with the top academies. But it's pales in comparison to the maneuvering and the shaking and the analysis that U.S. parents have to make. So I'm going to end my points by saying, because we have these gatekeepers, or at least the system is set up to have these gatekeepers, we don't have club neutral pathways without the exceptions to becoming a professional soccer player or professional coach in that manner. So what are your thoughts on what I just said?
No, I mean, think about how difficult it would be to be a club director, administrator at a small club in the United States. I mean, let's say you're doing great work, as you say. Let's say, you're really developing players, you're developing teams. And I've seen this a lot, at least in my area, where you get these teams that are younger, that are fantastic. They look great, great coaches, and they're at a smaller club. And by the time they are, especially year 13, majority of those players have left because of exactly what we're talking about, gatekeepers, and the fact that if they want to play in the most competitive leagues in the country, they have to pick a certain number of clubs. And so if you're a club administrator, those players who leave, that's lost revenue to you. We talked about it before, you can't make revenue any other way. So, you've developed all these great players or these great teams, and now they leave when they're older. You have to almost start over again. And so that makes it incredibly challenging. And so you have the revenue challenges that we talked about, and now you have these gatekeeper challenges to expand your business or expand your horizon to any way. So I feel really, really bad for clubs that are smaller, because it's really, really tough. And then just to tie it into the cultural piece, I think if the culture was a bit different and we had more parents who were a little bit more realistic about what their players need, because I just, I run into this quite a bit. I'm actually in the middle of doing player evaluations, and I'm lucky enough to where right now I actually coach some high level teams, but I've certainly been in scenarios where I've coached teams that were grassroots or just above grassroots, and I would get a lot of pushback from parents saying, "Hey, I need to try out for that club, or I need to go to this club." And at the end of the day, a lot of these players are fine just where they are, and the expectation is that, they need to be pushed and pushed and pushed, where, maybe from a player development standpoint, that's not where they are. And the parents a lot of times don't want to hear that. So, you have parents who continue to push players who maybe don't need to go to higher levels or aren't ready for higher levels, and they want to push that. So that cultural piece, what you're talking about, where in England, a lot of parents would be like, I'll talk about Argentina since I've been there quite a bit. In Argentina, parents are super realistic about where their kid stands. They might even be a little bit pessimistic about where they're like, I'll see a player and I'll be like, wow, he's pretty good. And he's like, he's fine. He's okay. They just, there's a lot more, I guess, understanding, and I guess that they believe in terms of where their players are, and they trust the coaches, in terms of, where the evaluations are. One of my wife's cousins, we visited them, and they have a player in a club down there, and they're just very realistic about where they stand. And I said, well, are you looking to maybe push him to one of the professional clubs? And he said, no, I don't think he's ready for that. We've been told he's not ready for that. And that's where it is. Whereas a lot of parents, I think, in this country are looking to push players maybe who aren't really there up into these gatekeeper clubs when they'd be fine just where they are.
Yeah. And so you have the cultural piece, and then soccer evaluation. it's I happen to believe, and I don't like to get into this rabbit hole of it's easier to coach this sport or easier to do that, but I happen to believe that soccer evaluations is a little bit harder and a little bit more nuanced than some of your American sports. I remember like it was yesterday when I was in high school, my buddy's high school team played against Oak Hill Academy, which is that esteemed basketball academy in Virginia. And Jerry Stackhouse was on that team. And I still remember he jumped over my friend, who was 6'3", head and dunked the basketball. After the high school game, he was signing kids' autographs. It was clear to me and everybody in that room, this is the guy that has the greatest potential to play at the next level. Soccer is a little bit more complicated than that. You can't see it so quickly. And it's not even until you hit puberty and then you understand their mindset and how their body feels out. And then you see all the results of what the coaches and the player has been doing all those years that you really start to see if they have some potential. And then you're getting into the 1% after that. And so I think that makes it a lot more tempting and exciting for our parents, but it makes it a lot more complicated. So when you watch a UDN game, you'll have a little fellow, he'll be dribbling past everybody, he'll be doing this and he'll be doing that, and you'll think this guy has something. And I'm quick to say it's not that parents are crazy all the time. It's really hard to know unless you've seen a bunch of potential professional soccer players when they were kids. You don't know. How that manifests itself is in a couple of ways. It's this culture, this obsession with iron sharpens iron. This is my opinion, Rory. This is not yours. You can elaborate or push back. This obsession with iron sharpens iron. I got to get my 10-year-old in what I perceive to be the most competitive environment, the most competitive gaming program right now, the most contact hours right now. This obsession with the perceived ability of their teammates. They got to be playing against and with the best players in North Carolina right now. And then the value at times they place on a coach that's somewhat surface level. They got to have this pedigree. They got to have this qualification. They got to have this, and this, and this. And that stuff is good, great indicators. All things being equal, go with the person who has the licensure and blah, blah, blah. But there's just almost a disdain at times for the dedicated volunteer who is willing to do whatever it takes to help your child. And I don't know. And in England, they don't have that culture, and it helps keep the cost down. So I'll hand it back to you.
No, so part of that is what you're describing that drives costs. I would tell you, I've been coaching 13 years, the best 9-year-old I've ever seen by a mile. It was the best 9-year-old I've ever seen. 5 years later, barely made his U14 team. And I'm telling you, if you would have told me this kid wouldn't have made it, I would have been shocked. It just goes to it is very difficult to predict how a kid is going to be at 9, 10 years old versus 14, 15. I've just seen it so many times, and it's very tough. It's easier parents who have multiple siblings or older siblings, they've been through the process. That is a much easier conversation. When you have a parent who is their oldest or their only child, they haven't seen, a layer of player throughput. I mean, from 9 to 18, and I've seen multiple cycles now. And, this push to play, I got to play here. I got to play with this club. I got to play in this league. Look, when you get to be older, when you're 14 and you are at the top 1%, yeah, you should probably be playing MLS Next or ECNL. And I would say that's unfortunate, but that's just the reality of the system that we're in. Right. But when you're 9, man, find a good coach, find a good team, find something that your player enjoys and stick with it, because I think personally that is much more important than chasing the badges, chasing the club, chasing the league, because at some point, if your player is good enough, it's not going to be hard to get on a team like that. I mean, that's just the reality of the scenario. Like, if your player is a good 14-year-old, he can make an ECNL or an MLS team. He just can. It's not difficult. So, at 9, 10 years old, and I know we're talking about cost, that it just drives it up the cost because they just feel like they have to go to the next best thing. And then you have a lot of these smaller clubs, these grassroots clubs, who are kind of grasping for players and revenue.
Yeah. And so as we take a step back, because we're talking about cost, let me qualify this by saying I am not, and I'm sure you're not, telling people what to do on their individual situations. I'm a firm believer in saying, hey, make the best decision you can based on the information you have available, your knowledge, and what your child wants. And those are individual decisions. But when you take a step back, this is almost as if it's almost like parents are demanding a private school education instead of saying utilizing the public school. And that has consequences. It's not telling anybody what to do, but that has consequences. Where Jude Bellingham, for example, would have been coached by a volunteer coach, parent coach, during the early parts of his development. That's just reality. And that's one of the reasons why that grassroots club can keep the cost down. But that grassroots coach, and I'm using him figuratively, I don't know his situation literally, would have been coaching, that volunteer coach would have been a member of the club, may have played at the club, have kids at the club, and may have been coaching 10 years and would have gotten some support from the FA, would have been getting support from the Premier League and other clubs. They even have tie-ups with these grassroots clubs. And not all of that is altruistic. They want tie-ups because they want to identify the best players. But all of that creates an ecosystem that helps reduce the cost. And that grassroots club would have access to a transparent pyramid where, without the gatekeepers, where if they have a good team, they're going to be able to play competitive games at the same level throughout the entire pyramid. And in the UK, with the exception of the EPL clubs. In France, they're going to be able to play in the pyramid and still play the top PSG until they get to a certain age. And all of this stuff leads to cost going up. So now let's talk about what a realistic pyramid from the professional men's, and we're talking men's right now, but we can extrapolate that to women, down to grassroots looks like, and what impact you believe that would have on revenue and cost.
Yeah, and I just want to say that's such a good analogy, talking about everybody trying to get into a private school versus a public school. And I would take that one step further and say that the ecosystem that we have, there are no public schools. Everybody's private, to some degree, because there's no public school option for anybody really outside of, some rec programs, but nobody's, in the competitive world, people aren't choosing those. So in terms of promotion and relegation, promotion, there are some kind of real staunch defenders and real people who like to attack promotion and relegation and talk about, how it doesn't work and how it's a myth. And there are, the way that we're talking, there are a lot of issues in terms of corruption in other parts of the world, in their ecosystems, in their football cultures and economies. However, when you have promotion and relegation, you have a merit-based system to differentiate. So there is a way of saying this club is here, this club is there, for better or for worse. And there are many reasons why a club may be in a certain league or not. It may be financial, it may be otherwise, but there's a system in place. In this country, there is no system in place other than a nebulous, political, who decides who gets what. Right? There's not really anything that, would differentiate a club, outside of Charlotte from Charlotte FC, other than the fact that Charlotte FC paid $300 million to be part of MLS. From a youth standpoint, what I believe promotion and relegation would do, at least in the youth game, I think it would be completely game-changing for the economics of the sport. I think it would be completely game-changing for players and for coaches, because right now what we have is a system where you don't really know who the best coaches are in the country. It's very difficult because in the system that we have, I mean, there are some ways of determining, which coaches are really good, but in many ways there aren't. And even further than that, it's really hard to decide what coaches actually develop players. I don't know, And so if you are a coach and you're coaching the New York Red Bulls, you have the best talent in the eastern part of the country. So you go undefeated in your league. Like, does that mean you're a good coach? I don't know. If you are a smaller club and you're in ECNL and you're in the middle of the table and you're doing well, I don't know what that means. So promotion and relegation would at least bring some level of clarity to that. And especially on the financial side, you would now be able to compete. So you would have, if let's say there's a club who really wants a player and they just say, you know what, come on over and play for us. We'll give you a scholarship. It'll be free, and the club just decides, look, we're going to have 6 players per team on scholarship because we want to get to this league or this level. And they'll make up that on the back end through promotion relegation or training compensation and solidarity payments. So it would open up the economy to a way that I don't think any other system would do, but it would take monumental leadership from US Soccer. I mean, that's what it would take for that to really happen. And I think we're unfortunately quite a ways away from that.
We can't even regulate birth year. So I don't think we're going to be making those types of changes. So the way I would describe it, because pro real is a hot topic word and people think about how difficult it would be to implement. So I would take a step back and as you were talking, I thought about a sentence. We need a merit-based, club-neutral system that creates professional pathways for players and coaches. So if Pro Real is the instrument to do that, and that's the best one, and that's the global model, that's what we go with. If someone else has another way of creating a merit-based, club-neutral system that provides opportunities financially for our coaches to move up the ladder and demonstrate their worth, and a clear club-neutral professional pathways so that parents don't have to try to figure out which club has tied to this league and blah, 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 I'm for it. And if it's not pro real, then I'm open for suggestions. Another thing that's not talked about enough is this type of system will attract foreign direct investment. I mentioned in the previous show that I'm in the Triangle area. We were bidding for a MLS team. We have a strong USL championship team here in NCFC. We in Durham, which is next to Raleigh, where NCFC is here, we have another strong team that's beloved by the community called the Tobacco Road FC. They would be a huge opportunity for a foreign, and when I say foreign, it could be a foreign national or someone, beyond North Carolina to invest in Tobacco Road FC if they could then get them to even the USL, because it actually doesn't take a tremendous amount of money to run one of these clubs. So a little bit of investment to get better players in, to develop better players, can get them huge revenue streams if they were to get promoted. None of that's going to happen. So I'm friends with the founder of Tobacco Road FC. He's a former college player, and he's kind of like doing it for the love of the game. He's not making a lot of money, and he's just not going to be able to attract the type of investment that he would be able to attract if there were a merit-based system in place.
I mean, you're seeing that internationally. I mean, look at what you're seeing with U.S. investment in international clubs. You're already seeing it.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. I mean, you got even celebrity. Think about it. You got the LeBrons and the late Kobe Bryant and other NBA players who are seeing this as a no-brainer, investing in either EPL clubs to further their brand and other things going on, merchandising and stuff. So imagine these guys investing in soccer here, but there's no vehicle to allow them to logically do that and get the returns they require. Now, we're going to wrap this show up by going back to the micro level. I have often said it can be misleading to compare the cost of club soccer in the States to the cost of grassroots soccer around the world. And one of the reasons it could be misleading, and I want to get your take on this, is culturally, American parents tend to, and players for that matter, tend to want a paid coach, even at those younger ages. They want 2 to 3 days of training. They want to be in a competitive gaming program, everything scheduled out. they don't explicitly say this, but they want the administration so that the program is well organized and very transparent and all that other stuff. And all that costs money. Then they want to attend various tournaments, some local, some with travel, and they want to compete in leagues that they perceive to be highly competitive, that again includes a lot of travel. And my hypothesis is on the ground, you look at it on a micro level, and we've talked about this in the UK, the expectation is you're going to play for your local grassroots club. If you're good and you show some interest, we try to find you a better local grassroots club. You're going to have a volunteer coach. Some of the facilities will be nice. It may or may not be all the time. You're going to train once a week, but if you're really into it, you're going to spend the other 6 days always on the soccer ball. And then if you have something, there are soccer schools. We haven't talked about soccer schools, but there's soccer schools around that we may enroll you in. They're relatively cheap too. And then if you're really good, you may get picked up by a big academy, or you get picked up by one of these semi-pro academies as well. So I'm basically saying you can't compare club soccer to the cost of club soccer to the cost of soccer around the world, because they're just different entities. And before I offer my final thoughts on that, what do you think about what I just said?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what you're describing is just cultural differences. And, I have a very similar experience in Argentina where, the expectation is, especially in the younger ages, I think that can be the real difference. I see from my perspective, parents who have 8, 9, 10-year-olds who are having this expectation or want them to be playing as if they're in Manchester United's academy, where you're training 3-4 nights a week and the coach is a professional coach. And not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but I think, Gary Cliven would call this the discernment problem. A lot of parents don't have the experience or the education in the game to understand where their player's at realistically and what they need. There are very few, in my opinion, 8, 9, 10-year-olds who need to be training 4 days a week. There just aren't. And if they're, playing 4 days a week, maybe they're training 2 and they're just free playing for 2 or something like that. In Argentina, the youngest age groups are all local. They're all local. Nobody goes to an academy until they're 12, 13, unless, you're a generational talent, which, we again have an issue where people just don't have a good, I think you and I have a lot of experience now that people don't have an understanding of the levels of where players are at. I mean, I have two boys who are very good players, but again, I've coached at the Philadelphia Union. I've seen their academy. I've seen, MLS games, MLS Next games, like the level's really high. And so for what is an 8, 9, 10-year-old, we already talked about it. Who knows where they're going to be? And so it all drives costs. So, these parents who are looking to get to these gatekeeper clubs, who are looking to, do really a lot more than what probably is needed for the vast majority of them, it drives up the cost in this ecosystem that we live in and the culture that drives it.
Yeah. And so another misunderstanding, and we're wrapping this up, is you have to remember the kids who receive that level of training. And I'm going back to the UK. You said this as well. It's 1 or 2%. So a lot of times people will say, hey, soccer in the UK is really cheap. Look at so-and-so at this academy. And they don't understand that that's great. And the academy is investing in those kids, but it's only a very small amount. The majority of them are in grassroots clubs, and the parents are comfortable with that. And then you get into, and we're not gonna go there in this show, but you get into that sort of deeper discussion of what really drives development. And in my podcast, I say, hey, development is a process where we take a little bit of what you have, we teach you some stuff to improve on-field performance, right? And from a soccer perspective, and then you got human development, the socio-emotional stuff. But from a soccer perspective, you're going to bring me your child. I'm going to take what they bring to the table, I'm going to do some things with them and help them get better. And the question has to become, what is my role as a coach in that process? In American sports, it tends to be very coach centric, but in soccer, especially at those younger ages, it tends to be more of a facilitator. Now, this can be insulting to some coaches because they feel as if you're saying their value is not important. No. It's almost like a yoga instructor versus a boot camp instructor. They're both important, but the yoga instructor can be very good at creating the environment for you to go through your own self-healing. Very important, just a different role. And another thing and this is my opinion, that offends our coaches sometimes. I'm probably going to get a lot of hate mail when I say this, but we have to come to terms with the fact that we can upskill parents to some degree to take some of the development off the hand of our most experienced coaches at those younger ages. And that just cannot be looked at as a stigma. But we got to support them. We got to educate them. We have to mentor them. And we can't just deplete our recreational programs. But we gotta figure out a way to help build capacity. So, like, I haven't taken any coaching courses, so you can jump in on this. But like what you're doing on the YouTube channel, what those guys at 343 are doing in the podcast, what others are doing. There's other programs like this where they're literally telling you, this is how you have to design a successful session. This is the philosophy around it. This is what you should see. Very tangible, practical advice to help us upscale this. We need more of that if we're going to bring down the cost curve. Because remember, if it's a supply and demand problem, one of the problems is we don't have enough coaches to meet this cultural demand that parents have. So I did a lot of talking there. What do you think?
Yeah. When you talk about parent involvement, I do think there's a big stigma, at least in this country, from getting parents involved. And we have to kind of, in a way, combat what is this culture that we have here, because with the other countries, they have a culture that is about development and playing, and we have a very different culture. And so some of the best assistant coaches I've ever had were parent coaches. Parents in general want the best for their kid, so getting them involved and trying to direct them into what is the best practices, most of the time they're very, very open to that. So in terms of decreasing costs and the cost of it, any type of parent education is going to help with that, whether it be micro or macro level.
Yeah, so I'll give my closing thoughts to say, having looked at this, at the risk of hastily offering any sort of suggestions, my initial thoughts are this: hey, we have to sort of deal with this supply demand issue. At the top, we have gatekeeper leagues, gatekeeper clubs that put a strain on the supply of competitive soccer. And then at the bottom, we have this huge demand. I say at the bottom, but from the demand side, we have this huge demand, which is great for competitive soccer, but we need to holistically try to manage expectations on what the soccer industry can deliver. It will be no different than going to my public school, expecting the teacher to give one-on-one lessons to my own individual child. We have to be really clear about what a club can do and what a club can't do, but the value proposition of what we can do and why that's a good fit for your kid. And then parents need to reflect on sort of, am I paying for more soccer than my kid needs or wants? And what am I actually getting as a return? So a transparent, merit-based system that opens up the supply, right? So that more clubs can come in and meet the demand and have access to leagues and a competitive gaming program that's appealing to parents. Then from the demand side, it's great that more kids want to participate, but we have to be realistic about what the clubs can provide. And then I think we have to build capacity in the coaching circles to make our parks and rec select and our challenge programs more attractive. And the only way we can build the capacity we need and keep the cost down is upskill our most dedicated and enthusiastic parents. And in order to do that, before people laugh me out of the room, that's not a 1-year thing. That's a strategic plan of workshops, mentorship, online education, on-field education, with the understanding it's going to be ugly. But if someone coaches their kid when they're 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10, by the time they're 10, they would already have 4 years of experience. And then they would have another kid and they would be doubling back. So it'd almost be like 8 years of experience. That's the way it works in the rest of the world. And that's how they keep the cost down. And then with a merit-based system, and before you guys laugh me out of the room, when that kid moves on to another club, the club gets some degree of compensation that makes the investment in development financially viable long term. Rory, did I miss anything?
No, that's a fantastic summary. The only thing I would say to sort of end things, and again, the reason that I really wanted to jump on is that I wanted to make sure people didn't miss what is the biggest issue, which is the system and how it's set up. You know, I often describe this as having to go through the matrix. I mean, people oftentimes focus on the micro issues and they blame the clubs, and it's really not the club's fault. You know, it's the macro system that we deal with, and the fact that there is no merit-based system as you've described, and there's no other way for clubs in the country, most of them, to make money other than tuition. And the costs are high. They just are. And so if there's no other way to generate revenue but tuition, your tuition is going to be high. And that is going to exclude people from a cost perspective. And then, as we talked about before, from a league gatekeeper's perspective and a supply demand perspective. So I really just think that discussions like this, the more that these discussions happen, the more it will open certain parents' eyes up to what's happening. And then maybe at some point, there'll be enough political pressure on U.S. soccer and governing bodies to actually make changes.
Guys, this has been Neil Crawford. I'm the host of The Inside Scoop and also the founder of Anytime Soccer Training. I sat down with Coach Rory O'Neal, who is a YouTube sensation, helping grassroots coaches and coaches all across the world with practical tips on training sessions as well as other things. And we've talked about the macro issues driving some of the challenges we have in youth soccer. But I'm an optimistic person, Coach. I think we're going to figure this thing out. But the first step of figuring this thing out is being very clear-eyed about the situation. And that's what we try to do today. Again, thank you so much, Coach, for joining me on the Inside Scoop. And guys, let's get better together.